My daughter-in-law leaned in close, her breath smelling of champagne, even though it was only 6 in the evening. She whispered that they were only inviting me out of pity, so I should not stay long. I looked at the massive brick building looming behind her, the place she thought was her big break. She had no idea that I signed the checks that kept the lights on. I just smiled and gripped my purse tighter. My name is Marjorie Ellison, and at 62 years of age, I have learned that the sharpest knives are not found in a kitchen drawer, but in the soft whispers of family. I stood in the gravel parking lot of Ironwood Terrace, the cold wind of the East Coast evening biting through the wool of my navy coat. It was an old coat. I knew that. It had seen better decades, let alone better days. I was trying to smooth a stubborn wrinkle near the hem when I smelled her perfume. It was expensive, floral, and suffocating. Brittany, my daughter-in-law, materialized at my elbow. She leaned in, her lips grazing my ear as if she were sharing a warm secret, though her tone was as frigid as the air around us. We only invited you out of pity, so don't stay long. Or make things awkward, she whispered. It felt like a physical slap. A stinging heat rose to my cheeks, but my face remained frozen in a practiced, benign smile. I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I was a statue of the sweet, confused old woman they needed me to be. Over the last 3 years, my heart had developed a thick callus from the friction of their disdain. I felt a quiet nothingness where the pain used to be, a silence that was becoming more comfortable than their noise. Brittany's eyes dropped to my feet. I was wearing my sensible black flats, the ones with the scuffed toes that I had polished with a black marker earlier that afternoon. She let out a small, sharp sigh that sounded like a tire leaking air. Honestly, Marjorie. The invitation said semi-formal. She said, her voice dripping with faux concern. Just try not to talk too much to my family or the investors. We don't want them asking about, well, your situation. She meant my poverty. She meant the small apartment with the radiator that clanked all night. She meant the shame she felt at being associated with a woman who looked like she took the bus here. Which I had. I looked past her shoulder. Ethan was standing about 15 feet away near his leased Audi. The glow of his smartphone illuminated his face. He was scrolling through nothing, staring intently at a blank screen or a static menu, anything to avoid making eye contact with me. He had heard her. I knew the set of his jaw. I knew the way his shoulders hunched when he was uncomfortable. My son, the man I had raised to be brave, was hiding behind a screen of indifference while his wife carved pieces off my dignity. I looked up at the restaurant. Ironwood Terrace. It was a magnificent structure, a renovated industrial brick warehouse that screamed gentrification and high margins. The yellow light spilling from the tall windows looked inviting. Brittany thought this place was her ticket to the executive suite. She thought the owners, the mysterious holding company, were distant corporate entities. A thought crossed my mind. Clear and cold. I only had to say 5 words to the manager inside to have the power cut, the lease voided, and the doors locked. I owned the bricks. I owned the land. I owned the very clause in the contract that allowed this restaurant to exist. But I said nothing. I clutched the strap of my vinyl purse, the one I bought at a discount store 5 years ago. To the world, and to my children. I was Marjorie the widow, Marjorie the burden, Marjorie who needed to be managed and hidden away like a dirty secret. They did not know that in the quiet boardrooms of the city centre, behind closed mahogany doors. I was Mrs. Ellison. They did not know that the woman they were ashamed of was the silent architect of their entire lifestyle. Tonight was not about arguing. I was done trying to prove my worth to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I watched Brittany smooth her silk dress, confident in her superiority, confident that she was the protagonist of this evening. I decided then and there to let her have the stage. I would not interrupt. I would not correct her. I would simply let her weave the rope of her own arrogance, loop by loop, until it was tight enough to hold her weight. The heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung open. The warmth rushed out to meet the cold night air, illuminating the wrinkles on my face. Okay, I thought to myself, the voice in my head steady and calm. You want me here for appearance's sake? I will be here, but I am not leaving as quietly as you think. I was not always a prop in the background of my son's life, nor was I always the silent woman clutching a discount handbag. Decades before, I became a nuisance to my daughter-in-law. I was a night shift nurse, scrubbing floors and changing bedpans under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the county hospital. Later, I moved to Everstead Social Services Cooperative, a small non-profit organization that scrambled to find temporary shelter for the homeless. The pay was enough to keep the heat on, but rarely enough to turn it up past 65 degrees. When my husband, Leonard, died of a sudden stroke, Ethan was only 14 years old. The grief was a heavy, wet blanket that I had to drag around while working 2 jobs. I would finish my shift at Everstead, then take night classes on community organization and non-profit management. I remember riding the bus home at midnight, my head knocking against the cold glass window as I dozed off, terrifyingly exhausted, only to wake up and smile for Ethan over breakfast so he would not worry. He never knew I slept on that bus. He only knew there was cereal in the bowl and milk in the fridge. The turning point came on a brutal Tuesday in February. I was trying to place a shivering family of 4 into a shelter we were renting from a slumlord. The building was rotting from the inside out, the pipes groaning like dying animals. I looked at the mold creeping up the drywall and realized that as long as we were begging landlords for scraps, we would never offer these people a real home. We needed to own the dirt. We needed to own the bricks. I became obsessed. During my lunch breaks, while my co-workers ate together, I sat in the back of free real estate seminars, taking furious notes in a spiral notebook. I learned about tax liens, distressed properties, and government incentives for affordable housing. I learned that the city was desperate to offload crumbling buildings in failing neighborhoods. When Ethan packed his bags for university, I did something that made the neighbors whisper that grief had finally made me senile. I sold my car. It was a reliable sedan, the last valuable thing Leonard had left us. I took that cash, combined it with every penny I had saved, and put a down payment on a 3-story brick building in a neighborhood that the police avoided. "You're losing your mind, Marge," my sister had told me. "That place is a money pit." I ignored her. For 5 years, I lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet case manager at Everstead. By night and on weekends, I was the owner of Hearthstone Community Holdings. It was a dry, corporate name I chose specifically because it sounded boring and anonymous. I learned to read legal contracts until my eyes burned. I spent nights holding a flashlight for plumbers at 2 in the morning because I could not afford emergency rates. I leveraged that first building to buy a second, then a third. I turned them into safe, clean, affordable apartments for single mothers and veterans. I made money. Real money. but I put every cent back into the buildings, or into the trust. I continued to wear my old coats and take the bus because a new car would not keep a family off the street. Ethan never knew. To him, I was just his mother who worked a low-wage social work job. I tried to tell him once, shortly after he graduated. I sat him down at the kitchen table, ready to explain Hearthstone, ready to show him the empire I had built from grit and sleepless nights. "Mom, look, I really don't have time for your work stories right now," he had said, checking his watch, his voice tight with impatience. "I'm trying to focus on my quarterly review. It's a different world out there. High stakes." I had closed my mouth then. If he saw me as simple, I would be simple. The victory was in the keys I handed to a homeless veteran, not in the bragging rights at a dinner party. Then came Brittany. She was sharp, ambitious, and had a degree in marketing that she wielded like a weapon. She came from a family that discussed summer homes and country clubs. When she looked at me, she did not see a woman of resilience. She saw a renovation project that was too far gone to save. "Have you ever thought about, well, updating your look?" she asked me once, early in their marriage, gesturing vaguely at my outfit. "It might help you feel more confident around Ethan's friends." She thought she was being kind. She thought I was a relic of a harder, sadder time that needed to be polished or hidden away. She had no idea that the Everstead thing she mocked was now largely funded by the Hearthstone thing I owned. They saw a poor old woman. I saw 2 children playing house, completely unaware that the roof over their heads was held up by the very hands they refused to shake. In the early years of their marriage, I tried to be the bridge between their shiny new world and my quiet one. I would spend Sunday afternoons slow cooking a beef stew or layering a lasagna, packing it carefully into Tupperware to drive over to their pristine, minimalist apartment. Brittany would open the door, her smile tight and practiced, like a rubber band stretched too far. She would take the warm container, hold it up for a selfie with me, and caption it, "Sweet mother-in-law, dropping by with dinner blessed," before placing it directly into the refrigerator without lifting the lid. I learned to stop asking if they liked it. I knew the answer was in the trash can 3 days later. It was during one of our obligatory monthly dinners that the invisible wall between us became concrete. Brittany was stabbing at her salad, complaining about the housing market with the dramatic flair of someone who had never actually worried about a utility bill. "It is absolutely insane out there." She sighed, rolling her eyes. "You need 20% down just to get a viewing. We are never going to find a forever home in this economy." I cleared my throat, leaning forward slightly. I had just closed a deal on a foreclosed duplex that week, negotiating the price down by 15%. Well, I started gently. You know, sometimes looking at older properties with good bones is the way to go. If you look for distressed. Oh, stop. Marjorie. Brittany interrupted, holding up a manicured hand. "Please don't compare your time to ours. That was 30 years ago. The market is completely different now. You can't just fix up a house anymore." I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to correct her, to mention that I had actually kept a roof over our heads by knowing exactly how to fix up a house. Instead, he took a long sip of his wine. "She's right, Mom," he said, avoiding my eyes. "You don't understand the pressure we are under. Making 6 figures isn't what it used to be. It is cutthroat." He spoke to me as if I were a child who believed money grew on trees, rather than the woman who had taught him how to balance a checkbook. Then came the suggestion that made my blood run cold. Brittany set her fork down and looked at me with an expression that mimicked concern but felt like calculation. "We were thinking," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Maybe you should downsize. That apartment is big for just one person. If you moved into a studio, or maybe a senior living facility, you could save so much on rent. And maybe, with the extra money, you could help us with a down payment. It would be an investment in the family." They thought I was renting. They thought I was scraping by. They wanted me to sell the home I owned outright, a fact I had hidden to avoid exactly this kind of entitlement to fund their lifestyle. "I am comfortable where I am," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my hands were trembling under the table. Brittany sighed, glancing at Ethan as if to say, "I told you she would be difficult." The disrespect seeped into everything, even my wardrobe. When they invited me to dinner with Ethan's colleagues, Brittany would come over early to check on me. "Are you wearing that?" she asked once, plucking at the sleeve of my cardigan. I don't want people to look down on you, Marjorie. We are going to a nice place. Maybe buy something that looks a little less Goodwill. It is clean, and it fits," I replied. "It's embarrassing," she muttered under her breath, turning away before I could respond. Whenever I tried to talk about my day, about the families I helped at Everstead, Brittany would check her Apple Watch. "Oh, is that Everplace still running?" she would ask, laughing lightly. "I am surprised they haven't run out of funding yet. It's cute that you stay busy. Though, it is not a hobby." "Brittany," I said once. "Mum, you don't get it," Ethan interjected, cutting me off again. "Real business is competitive. What you do is charity. It's different." I tried, a few times, to show Ethan the truth. I asked him to drive with me to see a renovation project I was supervising, a beautiful brick building I was bringing back to life. "I can't." "Mom," he said, checking his phone. "I have a conference call. Next time." There was never a next time. I realized he did not want to see my world because it did not fit the narrative he had built, that he was the self-made success rising from humble, tragic beginnings. Then came the moment that turned the knife. We were having coffee, and Brittany was glowing, vibrating with excitement about a new client she had landed. "It is huge," she beamed, looking at her friends, ignoring me. "It is for the Ironwood Hospitality Group. They are opening this massive new concept downtown. If I nail the launch event, I am set for partner. It is the biggest opportunity of my career." I froze, my coffee cup hovering halfway to my mouth. Ironwood Hospitality Group. I knew that name. I knew it intimately. I had spent 3 months negotiating with their CEO, Victor Lane. I had been the one to sign the lease that gave them the prime location for their flagship restaurant at a rate significantly below market value, in exchange for a strict community service clause. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who was currently describing the genius of the restaurant's location, completely unaware that the woman sitting across from her, the woman she thought was a charity case in a cheap sweater, held the deed to the building in a fireproof safe at home. She was building her career on a foundation that I owned, and she did not have a clue. The invitation arrived like a summons to a trial I had not realized I was attending. Brittany announced it over a speakerphone call while I was washing dishes in my small kitchen. It was to be a family and partners night at Ironwood Terrace, a high-stakes evening designed to blend personal intimacy with corporate networking. It was her chance to parade her stable, supportive family in front of the investors and the big boss. I knew I was not originally on the guest list. I found out later that Brittany's own mother had guilted her into it, asking, well, what about Ethan's mother? Surely she is coming. Brittany had been cornered. So, Ethan called me the next day. His voice was tight, the way it always got when he was trying to manage me. Mum? So, Brittany really wants you there? He lied, his voice cracking slightly. But, listen. It is going to be a very specific crowd. High net worth individuals. So, we need to have some ground rules. Just small ones. I gripped the receiver. Ground rules. Yeah. Just don't bring up money. And please, don't talk about the homeless shelter work. It makes people uncomfortable while they are eating. It sounds a bit heavy. If anyone asks, just say you are retired. Retired, I repeated flatly. You want me to erase 30 years of work? I want you to fit in. He snapped, then softened. Please, Mom. For me, just be a normal grandma for one night. I agreed. I hung up the phone and walked straight to my filing cabinet. I pulled out a thick folder labeled H.C. Holdings. Commercial Leases. I flipped to the section for Ironwood Hospitality Group. My finger traced Clause 14b, a provision I had insisted on with my lawyer. It stated that the tenant must provide quarterly community meals for the underprivileged as a condition of their below-market rent. I smiled. They wanted me to hide my work with the poor, yet their entire business model relied on a contract that mandated it. The irony deepened a week before the event. I opened my personal email to find a message from Victor Lane, the CEO of Ironwood. Dear Mrs. Ellison, I hope this email finds you well. I noticed your name on the guest list for our upcoming partner dinner submitted by our marketing lead, Brittany. I assume you are attending as her mother-in-law, but I wanted to personally invite you as our valued silent partner and community advisor. I would love to introduce you to a few new investors who admire the community model we have built. Best, Victor. He treated me like royalty. My family treated me like a stain on the carpet. I typed a brief reply, thanking him, but asking him to keep my business identity quiet for now. I wanted to see exactly how far they would go. I wanted to see the full extent of their shame. At lunch the next day, I told my colleagues at Everstead about the rules for the dinner. Sarah, our case manager, slammed her sandwich down. That is disgusting. Marjorie, she said, you funded that place if you want. I can call the health inspector or we can move the meal program to a different venue. Just say the word. Not yet, I said, sipping my tea. Let them play their parts. As the night approached, I watched Brittany unravel. She was manic, rehearsing her speeches, trying to learn how to sound wealthy. I overheard her on a video call with Ethan. Does this dress say old money or new money? She asked frantically. I need to look like I belong. Ethan. I need them to think we are just one step away from their tax bracket. Then came the final insult. The night before the dinner, Ethan stopped by my apartment. He was holding a plastic garment bag. He laid it on my couch and unzipped it to reveal an old, heavy wool coat. It had belonged to his father, Leonard. It was oversized, slightly moth-eaten at the collar, and smelled of cedar and dust. I was thinking, Ethan said, refusing to meet my eyes. You should wear this tomorrow, instead of your usual jacket. It looks vintage, and since it is big, it covers up. Well, whatever dress you pick. I just don't want you to look like you are trying too hard. I am afraid you will be off tone. He wanted me to wear my dead husband's old coat because he thought my own clothes were too embarrassing to be seen. He wanted to hide me under layers of wool. I ran my hand over the rough fabric. I remembered Leonard wearing this coat when we talked about opening a soup kitchen one day. Okay, I said softly. Really, Ethan looked relieved. Thanks, Mum. It is just better this way. He left, thinking he had solved a problem. He did not realize he had just handed me my armor. I would wear the coat. I would walk into that restaurant looking exactly like the poor, small widow they thought I was. I would not say a word to defend myself. I would let the coat, and the truth underneath it, do all the talking. This was my goodbye to the Marjorie they thought they knew. The morning of the event, I sat across from Mr. Harris, my lawyer of 20 years, in his office that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. The city outside was noisy, but in here, it was quiet enough to hear the scratch of his pen. We were reviewing the lease agreement for the Ironwood Terrace location. Specifically, we were looking at the termination clause. You realize you have them in a vice grip. Marjorie, Mr. Harris said, looking over his spectacles. According to the latest appraisal, that building has tripled in value since they moved in, if you decide not to renew their lease next year, or if you invoke the breach of character clause. Well, they lose their flagship location. They lose everything. I nodded, sipping the lukewarm water he had offered me. I know. I just wanted to be sure the clause regarding community reputation is ironclad. It is, he assured me. Now, about the other matter. This was the hard part. I slid the new draft of my will across the mahogany desk. My hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of the decision. For years, Ethan was set to inherit everything: the buildings, the portfolio, the cash. In this new version, 90% of my assets would go into a blind trust for Everstead and affordable housing initiatives. Ethan would receive a modest stipend, but only if he could prove gainful employment and zero debt for 2 consecutive years. Are you sure about this? Marjorie Harris asked gently. It is a significant change. I am not punishing him, I said, my voice steadying. I am just stopping the reward for his ingratitude. He thinks money falls from the sky. I need to teach him how to plant the seeds. I signed the document. On my way to the restaurant, I stopped by one of my shelters. I needed to remember why I was doing this. I spoke with a young mother named Clara, who had just moved her family out of a sedan and into a warm room. Her baby was asleep on the bed, limbs sprawled out in total safety. That image, that peace, was worth every cheap pair of shoes I had ever worn. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Victor Lane. Tonight, I am going to tell the investors that our success depends on our relationship with the landlord. Do you want to say a few words? I typed back. I will play it by ear. I knew what was happening at home. Ethan and Brittany were fighting about where to put me. I learned later that Brittany had won the argument, put her at the table near the kitchen doors. She had apparently said, that way, if she gets tired or confused, she can leave early without making a scene. Ethan sent me a text at 5 o'clock. Hey, Mum, no need to come too early. Why don't you get there after 7? Everyone will be seated by then, so it will be easier for you. It was a polite way of telling me to stay out of the spotlight during the cocktail hour. He did not want me mingling with the money. Back in my apartment, I stood before the mirror. I put on a navy blue dress that a former client had made for me. She was a seamstress I had helped years ago, and now she ran a successful boutique. The dress was simple, elegant, and fit me perfectly. It was the armor of a woman who was loved. Then I reached for the coat, the heavy, moth-eaten wool coat that belonged to my late husband, the one Ethan had given me in a plastic bag so I would cover up my embarrassing clothes. I slid my arms into the sleeves. It smelled of dust, but it felt like a hug from Leonard. I looked at my reflection. Underneath, I was the owner of a multi-million-dollar portfolio. On the surface, I was the charity case they wanted to hide near the kitchen. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. I was not going there to start a war. I was not going there to humiliate my son or destroy my daughter-in-law. I was simply going to stop protecting them from the truth. If they wanted to invite me out of pity, I would accept. But I would make sure that by the end of the night, they understood exactly who was pitying whom. I grabbed my purse, locked the door, and walked out into the night. I stood in the parking lot once more, the gravel crunching under my sensible shoes, replaying the moment that had just occurred. Brittany had leaned in, her breath smelling of expensive champagne and mints, and whispered those words that were meant to keep me in my place. We only invited you out of pity, so don't stay long, or make things awkward. She pulled back with a saccharine smile, smoothing her hair as a group of her colleagues waited by the entrance, their laughter bright and sharp like breaking glass. I watched them usher her inside, leaving me alone with the wind and the ghost of Leonard's coat wrapped around my shoulders. I took a deep breath, adjusted my collar, and followed them in. Inside. Ironwood Terrace was a masterpiece of industrial chic. The walls were stripped to the original red brick, illuminated by warm, amber light from low-hanging fixtures. The bar was a slab of polished, reclaimed oak. I ran my eyes over the grout lines and the ceiling beams. I knew exactly how much the sandblasting had cost, because I had approved the invoice 18 months ago. I knew the electrical wiring behind those bricks was brand new because I had insisted on it for safety compliance. To everyone else, this was just a trendy restaurant. To me, it was a spreadsheet come to life. I found my way to the group. Brittany was holding court near the bar, her hand resting possessively on Ethan's arm. She was introducing him to a circle of men in expensive suits. "Ethan is such a self-starter," she was saying, her voice projecting just enough to be heard by the VIPs. You know, his parents were just regular workers, blue-collar. Really. So he has always had that hunger to rise above his station. She was erasing my history in real time, painting Ethan as the phoenix rising from the ashes of my mediocrity. Ethan nodded along, looking down at his drink, complicit in the lie. Then Brittany saw me. She waved me over with a gesture one might use for a slow child. "And this is my mother-in-law, Mrs. Ellie," she announced, shortening my name as if Ellison was too much dignity for me to carry. She has been retired for a long time. She lives alone in a little apartment downtown. It is sweet that she could make it out. Isn't it? We worry about her being so isolated. She spoke loudly, her tone dripping with a performative compassion that was designed to solicit pity for herself. The saintly daughter-in-law caring for the burden. One of the men, an older gentleman with silver hair named Mr. Graham, squinted at me. I recognized him immediately. We had sat on opposite sides of a zoning board hearing 3 years ago. He tilted his head, his brow furrowing. "Ellison," he murmured, looking from my face to my old coat. "You look familiar?" "Have we—" "Oh, I doubt it," Brittany interjected with a shrill laugh, physically stepping between us. "Marjorie rarely leaves her neighborhood. Now, Mr. Graham, I have to tell you about the Cortelli projections." She steered the group away, leaving me standing by a high-top table. A server passed by with a tray of appetizers. He stopped dead when he saw me. It was Marcus, a young man who had eaten at the Everstead soup kitchen for 2 months before we helped him get into a culinary training program. His eyes went wide. "Mrs. Ellison," he whispered, glancing around nervously. I didn't know you would be here." "Hello, Marcus," I said softly. "The place looks wonderful. You are doing a great job." He looked like he wanted to hug me, or perhaps bow, but he saw Brittany glancing back. So he just gave me a quick, reverent nod and hurried away. I was invisible to the power players, but I was royalty to the staff. The lights dimmed, and the crowd moved toward the small stage at the front of the room. Brittany walked up to the microphone, radiating confidence. Behind her, a large screen glowed with the Ironwood logo. "When I took over the brand narrative for Ironwood," she began, her voice booming, "I realized that a restaurant is not just about food. It is about connection." I listened as she recited sentences that sounded strangely familiar. They should have. I had written them myself in the community engagement addendum of the lease agreement. She was quoting my legal requirements and presenting them as her soulful vision. "That is why," she continued, clicking a remote, "our marketing team came up with a revolutionary concept, the quarterly community table." A photo appeared on the screen. It was taken at the last meal service for the homeless. In the center, Brittany was smiling broadly, handing a plate to a child. In the far left corner of the photo, blurry and half cropped out, was the back of a woman in a grey cardigan, serving soup. That was me. It was a bold idea, Brittany said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. To bring the less fortunate into this space. But I fought for it because I believe in giving back. I looked toward the front table. Victor Lane, the CEO, was not looking at the screen. He was looking directly at me. His expression was pained, an apology etched into his features. He knew exactly whose idea it was. He knew it was a mandatory contract clause, not a marketing brainstorm. I caught his eye and gave a barely perceptible shake of my head. "Not yet." I signaled. "Let her finish." The applause was polite but enthusiastic. Brittany beamed, drinking it in. "Thank you," she said. "And now, to share a few words about our future and our key partnerships, please welcome our CEO, Mr. Victor Lane." Brittany stepped down, her face flushed with triumph. She looked at Ethan and gave him a thumbs up. She thought she had won. She thought she had secured her promotion. She had no idea that the man walking up to the microphone was about to peel the floorboards up from under her feet. Victor Lane stood at the podium, gripping the sides with the confidence of a man who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. He smiled warmly at the room, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing briefly on Brittany. "I want to start by thanking our incredible marketing team," he said, his voice smooth, especially Brittany, for that passionate presentation. It is always inspiring to see such creative interpretation of our brand's mission. Brittany preened in her chair, squeezing Ethan's hand. She looked like a cat that had just been given a bowl of cream. However, Victor continued, his tone shifting imperceptibly, none of this would be possible without the foundation beneath our feet. Literally, 6 years ago, Ironwood was on the verge of bankruptcy. We had this vision for a community-centered space, but no landlord in the city would touch us. The risk was too high, the margins were too thin. The room went quiet. The investors leaned in. This was the origin story. They loved the grit before the glory. We were saved by a single entity, Victor said. Hearthstone Community Holdings. They offered us this prime location at a rate that, frankly, my accountant still thinks is a typo. But there was a condition, a non-negotiable clause that we give back to the streets that surround us. He paused for effect. I am honored to have the founder of Hearthstone with us tonight. Please welcome our landlord, our silent partner, and my personal advisor on community outreach, Mrs. Marjorie Ellison. The silence that followed was not the respectful kind. It was the confused, heavy silence of a room trying to recalibrate reality. Brittany whipped her head around so fast I thought her neck might snap. Ethan stood up halfway, his face draining of all colour, looking like he had just seen a ghost. Wait, Brittany whispered, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry in the quiet room. That must be a coincidence. Just a name mix-up. I stood up. The chair legs scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that cut through the tension. I felt the weight of every eye in the room shift from the stage to me. I adjusted the lapel of Leonard's old coat and began to walk toward the front. Is that the old woman in the coat? A young investor in a tailored suit whispered to his neighbour. She owns the building. I thought Hearthstone was a hedge fund. It's a holding company. The neighbour murmured back, eyes wide. Smart. Very smart. I walked past Ethan. He was frozen, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. In the soft light of the restaurant I owned, wearing the coat of the father he missed. I suppose I didn't look small anymore. I looked like the person who signed the checks. Victor stepped aside as I ascended the small steps to the stage. He handed me the microphone with a slight bow of his head. Not just a landlord. Victor added into his lapel mic before stepping back. Mrs. Ellison taught us that profit and humanity don't have to be enemies. I took the microphone. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. I looked out at the sea of faces, the wealthy, the powerful, and my family, who looked like they were drowning. Thank you, Victor, I said, my voice calm and steady, devoid of the tremor Brittany usually heard. 6 years ago. I stood on the sidewalk outside this building. It was boarded up then. I watched a manager from the previous restaurant shoo away a homeless man who was just trying to get out of the rain. I decided then that if I bought this place, the next tenant would have to earn their keep. Not just in rent, but in decency. I saw Brittany flinch. So, I continued. I added Clause 14b to the lease. It mandates that Ironwood Terrace provide a full, hot meal to the shelter residents of Everstead every quarter. It is not a suggestion. It is a legal requirement for their occupancy. Behind me, the slide changed. Victor had queued it up perfectly. It was a high-resolution scan of the lease agreement. The signature page enlarged. My signature, sharp and clear, sat above the title owner, Hearthstone Community Holdings. Beside it was the highlighted text of the community meal clause. A ripple of gasps went through the room. The applause started slowly, led by Mr. Graham, the older investor, and then swelled into a genuine ovation. It was the sound of respect. I looked down at table 4. Brittany was slumped in her chair, her mouth slightly open, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. She looked small, I thought. I heard Mr. Graham lean over and whisper loudly to his companion. I thought that young girl said she invented the community program. Turns out she is just reading Mrs. Ellison's footnotes. Brittany heard it. I saw her face crumble. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, in my husband's old coat, and let the truth do its work. The applause eventually died down, but the line of people waiting to shake my hand did not. I accepted business cards from developers who had ignored my emails for a decade and nodded politely at socialites who suddenly found my grey hair distinguished rather than dowdy. Ethan stood at the very edge of the room, near the velvet curtains, looking like a man who had woken up in a foreign country without a map. He could not bring himself to approach me. Brittany was nowhere to be seen. Victor touched my elbow gently. Mrs. Ellison, let's step into the private office for a moment, he said. There are some matters we should discuss while the iron is hot. We moved into a small, glass-walled conference room in the back, away from the noise of the clinking glasses. Victor poured me a glass of sparkling water. That went better than expected, he said, sitting on the edge of the mahogany desk. The investors are eating it up. They love the narrative. In fact, 3 of them just asked if Hearthstone would be interested in anchoring the new developments in the West End. They want you at the centre of the model. I took a sip of the water. It was cool and sharp. I might be open to it, I said. On my terms. Victor nodded respectfully. Then his expression turned serious. Marjorie, about the marketing team. Specifically your daughter-in-law. Do you want me to continue letting them take public credit for the community initiatives? I can issue a press release clarifying the intellectual property. It is entirely up to you. I set the glass down. No need for a press release, I said. I do not need the fame, but I will be adjusting where they stand. Before Victor could ask what I meant, the heavy oak door flew open. Brittany stormed in, her mascara smudged beneath her eyes, dragging Ethan behind her by his sleeve. She slammed the door shut, vibrating with a mix of humiliation and rage. Mom? She began, her voice cracking and shrill. How could you? You let me go up there and talk like that. You made us look like idiots in front of everyone. She was crying, but it was the angry, hot tears of a child who had been caught, not a woman who was sorry. I remained seated, crossing my hands over my lap. I did not put words in your mouth. Brittany, I said calmly. I simply stopped hiding the fact that those words were originally mine. Why didn't you tell us? Ethan burst out, finding his voice at last. He looked frantic. We have been worried about you. We thought you were struggling. You let us believe you were poor. I tried to tell you, I replied, my voice dropping an octave, hard as stone. I tried many times. Do you remember when I wanted to show you the renovation on 4th Street? You were too busy? Do you remember when I tried to explain how I funded the down payment for my apartment? Brittany told me that times have changed and cut me off. Whenever I opened my mouth, you two told me I didn't understand the modern world. Brittany wiped her nose with the back of her hand, sniffing loudly. Well, if we had known. She stammered, her eyes darting between me and Victor. If we had known you were the landlord. Obviously, we would have treated the situation differently. We would have given you a seat of honor. We wouldn't have. She trailed off, realizing too late that she had just walked into a trap of her own making. Exactly, I said. You would have treated the landlord with respect, but you treated your mother with contempt. That is the difference. Ethan stepped forward, his hands shaking. Do you own other buildings? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Are you wealthy? Actually, wealthy. It was a pathetic question. It stripped away any pretense that he cared about my feelings. He only cared about the inventory. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. It was a summary of the addendum I had signed with Mr. Harris that morning. I slid it across the desk toward them. I have taken care of my own future, I said. You do not need to worry about me becoming a burden anymore. Ethan scanned the paper, his eyes widening as he read the bullet points. A trust, he mumbled, reading aloud. 90% of real estate assets transfer to the Everstead Foundation. What is this? It means that when I die, the buildings belong to the people who need them. I explained. There is a small stipend for you, Ethan, but it is conditional. It only pays out if you maintain full-time employment and stay debt-free for 2 consecutive years. The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed overhead. Then Brittany spoke up, her voice small and trembling. What about me? The question hung in the air, naked and greedy. Victor turned his face away, pretending to study a painting on the wall, but I saw his shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. I looked my daughter-in-law in the eye. You have your own parents, Brittany. You have a degree. You have talent, I said. You do not need my assets. You just need to learn how to speak to human beings without using the word pity. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Brittany stood there, mouth agape, realizing that the golden ticket she thought she had married had just turned into a donation receipt for a homeless shelter. News travels faster than fiber optics in the corporate world, especially when it involves a public undressing of ego. Within 24 hours, the story of the landlord mother-in-law had circulated through the Ironwood offices and spilled out into the local business community. No one said a word directly to Brittany's face. That would have been mercy. Instead, they gave her the side-eye in the break room and stopped talking whenever she entered the elevator. She was no longer the rising marketing star. She was the woman who had tried to evict the owner of the building from her own table. The crushing blow came in a company-wide email from Human Resources on Tuesday morning. I heard about it from Victor. The subject line was, Clarification on Community Initiatives. The text explicitly stated that the quarterly meal program was conceptually founded and legally mandated by our partnership with Hearthstone Community Holdings, led by Mrs. Marjorie Ellison. I can only imagine Brittany reading that at her desk, her hand trembling on her mouse, realizing that her attempt to claim credit had resulted in her name being scrubbed from the project entirely. I learned later that several investors had quietly pulled Victor aside to express concerns about the integrity of the brand storytelling. Victor had to work overtime to smooth things over, but the damage to Brittany's upward trajectory was done. She was radioactive, 3 days after the dinner. Ethan knocked on my door. He looked terrible. His eyes were rimmed with red, and he wore the rumpled clothes of a man who had been sleeping on the couch. He sat at my kitchen table, rejecting the tea I offered. I am sorry. Mum, he said. his voice thick. I really am. I didn't know how to handle her. She is so intense about her image. I just wanted peace. I sat across from him, folding my hands. Ethan, letting your wife humiliate your mother is not peace, I said gently but firmly. It is surrender. You watched her treat me like a stray dog because it was easier than having an argument. That is what hurts me. He put his head in his hands. I know, he whispered. I am in trouble. Mom, deep trouble. We are living paycheck to paycheck. The car, the clothes, the dinners. It is all on credit. I have $30,000 in consumer debt. I was hoping if we bought a house, you could help with the down payment. And maybe I could use some of that equity to pay off the cards. It broke my heart to hear it. But I knew that writing him a check would only be handing him a shovel to dig a deeper hole. He had been chasing an illusion, and now the bill was due. I cannot give you the money. Ethan, I said, if I pay your debts, you will never learn how you got into them. But I can offer you a different kind of help. He looked up, hopeful. I have an old friend who runs a non-profit housing initiative 3 towns over. I continued. They need a project manager. The salary is $40,000 a year less than what you make now. But it is stable. And as part of the deal, I want you to spend 2 weekends a month volunteering at the Everstead shelter. You need to see what real struggle looks like. You need to get your hands dirty. 40,000 less, he repeated, stunned. Brittany will kill me. Then maybe you should stop living for Brittany's approval and start living for your own self-respect, I said. When he told Brittany, she laughed in his face. She asked him if he was planning to throw his career away to hang out with the homeless. But her laughter died quickly when she received her quarterly performance review. It was scathing. Her bonus was slashed to 0. The glossy life she was trying to maintain was cracking, and she realized she could not afford to lose Ethan's income, even if it was reduced. She came to see me the next week. She brought a gift box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a cashmere scarf that probably cost $300. Mum, I just wanted to apologize, she said, her voice dripping with that same fake sweetness she used on investors. I have been under so much stress. I hope we can put this behind us. I did not touch the scarf. You do not need to buy me, Brittany, I said, and you do not need to perform for me. I am not a client. If the day comes when you truly understand why you were wrong, not because you got caught, but because you hurt a human being, I will know. I will hear it in your voice, not see it in a gift box. She left with the scarf, her face pale. Meanwhile, the fallout had a silver lining. The exposure from the dinner brought a wave of donations to Everstead. With the influx of capital, I did not just sit back. I purchased another abandoned warehouse on the south side of the city. I decided to renovate the entire first floor into a life skills space. It would be a center specifically designed for people who had been marginalized by their families, the elderly, the single mothers, the black sheep. It was a symbolic strike against the Brittany's of the world. I was building a place where no one would ever be invited just out of pity. I was building a place where they would belong. It had been exactly 1 year since the night at Ironwood Terrace. I sat at a small, scratched table in Ethan's new apartment. It was not a luxury condo with floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a modest 2-bedroom unit in a refurbished building managed by a non-profit organization. He was stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce on a stove that had seen better days. And for the first time in a long time, The air smelled like garlic and home, not tension and pretense. Brittany was not there. Ethan placed a steaming plate in front of me. He looked thinner, but the nervous energy that used to vibrate off him was gone. The sauce might be a little bland, he said, sitting opposite me. I am still learning how to cook on a budget. It smells perfect, I said. He told me about his new job as a project manager for the affordable housing initiative I had connected him with. The pay is about 40% less than what I was making, he admitted, winding pasta around his fork. But yesterday, I helped a veteran get his heating fixed before the snowstorm hit. He actually shook my hand. I felt real. Mom. I felt useful. He paused, looking down at his food. Brittany couldn't handle it. He said quietly, the downgrade, the budget cuts. We argued about money every single night until there was nothing left to say. We are separated. She moved back in with her parents last month. I nodded slowly. I did not feel triumph, only a quiet relief that the bleeding had stopped. Ethan looked up, his eyes rimmed with red. I realized something, he said, his voice cracking. I never asked you what you actually did for a living. I just waited to see what you could do for me. I lost so many years, just not seeing you. I am so sorry. I did not offer cheap forgiveness. I let the words hang there, heavy and necessary. I am here. Ethan, I said. But I am done being the extra chair at the table. If you want to understand my life, you can come to the shelter on Saturday. Help us serve the soup. Then you can decide if you really want to walk this road with me. I'll be there, he said. And I believed him. In a parallel world, miles away from this quiet kitchen. Brittany sat in an interview room at a small marketing agency. I had heard through the grapevine that the hiring manager had paused over her resume. I see here you led the community outreach at Ironwood, the manager had asked. Wasn't there some confusion about the credit for that program? Brittany had tried to explain, tried to spin it. But the reputation of being the woman who stole credit from her own mother-in-law had stuck like tar. She was learning the hard way that looking down on someone because of their shoes comes with a heavy price tag. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Victor Lane. Marjorie, he said, his voice booming. Good news. The investors want to renew the lease, 10 years, and they want to upgrade the community meal program to a monthly event. We are increasing the budget. Excellent, I said. One question, Victor asked. Do you want to keep your name off the banner? We can keep it anonymous. I looked out the window at the snow falling on the city I had spent a lifetime trying to house. No, I said, smiling. Change the sponsor name from Hearthstone to Everstead. I am done hiding in the back office. The only people I want to stand in front of are the ones we are serving. On a bitter, cold night in December, I stood in front of Ironwood Terrace. I was wearing my sensible coat, the new one I had bought for myself, warm and sturdy. Beside me, Ethan was ladling stew into bowls for a long line of people who needed a hot meal. A new waiter, a young man who didn't know our history, whispered to Ethan as he brought out more bread. Who is that lady? The one directing everyone. Ethan didn't look down. He didn't mumble. He looked right at the young man, his chin high. That is my mother, he said. Later. As we were wiping down the tables, Ethan turned to me. Mum? He asked softly. Are you still angry about what I said that night, that we only invited you out of pity? I paused, holding a rag in my hand. Yes, I answered honestly. But it was a gift. Ethan, because of that insult, I stopped inviting myself into your life out of pity. I stopped begging for a seat. I went home that night to my small, warm apartment. I sat at my desk and wrote a check for Everstead, using the funds from the new lease agreement. I thought about Brittany. I did not wish her failure. I simply hoped that one day she would invite someone to dinner, not because she felt sorry for them, but because she truly wanted them to stay. I closed my checkbook. The sweetest revenge was not seeing them fall. It was building a life where no one had the power to tell me not to stay long. If I stayed now, it was because I wanted to, not because I needed anyone to give me a chair. Thanks so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. I read every single one to see how far our family has grown. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button for Grandma's Family Diary. Give this video a big like and smash that hype button to help us reach more people. See you in the next one.